My guest today is Dr. David Luke. I'm very, very much looking forward to this conversation. Dr. Luke, he is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Greenwich. He also teaches at Aleph Trust you're a program leader there, and you teach psychedelics, altered states, and transpersonal psychology. Dr. Luke has written 13 books. One of them is DMT Entity Encounters, Dialogues on the Spirit Molecule. Very, very exciting topic, and so much we can explore today. Dr. Luke is so exciting that I can't even choose where to start from. But if you can tell our listeners and viewers about you and how you have ended up on this path.
Thank you very much for having me here, Rana. I'm not sure how I ended up here, but I've always had an interest in the other, in altered states and unusual experiences. And I actually went away to study psychology, in my youth, specifically to try and explore those kinds of unusual experiences. And of course, was horribly disappointed with an undergraduate psychology degree and what we learn about those experiences. They're usually just written off as hallucinations or delusions. And, it's only until you get further along the academic treadmill that you begin to discover there are actually other researchers out there doing work in this area. So my area of research is covers altered states of consciousness broadly, whether it's meditation or dreams or psychedelics, and what I call exceptional experiences or exceptional human experiences, all the weird and wonderful stuff that isn't quite part of the everyday world. So like near-death experiences or mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, telepathic experiences, and so on.
And is there one line that puts all of these together?
Is there one line? Not really. Mm-hmm. That's the umbrella, and it's actually quite a broad umbrella, but that in itself is quite a common thread, because it doesn't really matter which kind of altered state we're looking at. We see the same kinds of experiences and phenomena emerge. And of course, I've had parallel interest in meditation and dreams and psychedelics and other altered states, they can pretty much all take you to similar places and open up a kind of Pandora's box of possible experiences that you may have that challenge our ordinary everyday worldview. So yeah, not any one thing.
What was your first altered state of consciousness that you experienced that got you interested in this topic?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, even as a small child, would do those hold your breath or spinning around, trying to get dizzy, and just anything really to just feel a different state of consciousness. I used to have experiences talking to the lights when I was little, perhaps like aliens or something. I'd have these kind of conversations with the lights, which seemed a little bit quirky and odd. My interest in altered states continued all the way. I, very much experimented quite a lot when I was younger and kind of used my brain like a neurochemistry playset, really. Mm-hmm. So, I explored every possible avenue for getting into altered states that I could find, and especially dreams.
I would love to get to dreams, but first I want to explore psychedelics a bit before we move on to, because psychedelics to me is the easiest way, isn't it?
Yes, it's the most direct. It's the most obvious.
Yes, it's a shortcut because in order to work on your dreams or to meditate, it takes more rigorous practice for you to be able to get there. So starting from psychedelics, how does it shape our understanding of our consciousness?
So, having a psychedelic experience can be mind-blowing, absolutely. There's not really an adequate way to prepare somebody for a psychedelic experience. You can say, oh, it may do this, it may do that, but when you have a profound experience, it tends to shatter your worldviews, what your beliefs about the limits of experience and possibly the nature of reality itself. You may have experiences of transcending time and space, or feeling like a kind of unitive consciousness at one with the universe. You may encounter beings which you perceive to be real. You know, you may have moments of deep, deep love or compassion or awe or bliss or ecstasy, the likes of which we don't often ordinarily experience in our daily life, except perhaps in moments of deep grief or trauma or stress, or occasionally there are other triggers. But so these experiences don't fit into our normal everyday world very easily, and they can be quite life-changing. You know, in many ways, people change their metaphysical orientation, their spiritual orientation, their sense of connectedness to other people, their moral compass, their values. Everything can change, you know, and then people come back from the experience and they leave their partner, quit their job, sell their house, move country, you know, as a result of these big life changes.
And how does it shape the collective, especially now that some people call it the psychedelic renaissance? There's more awareness, more people are interested. Do you think that it's also shaping the collective?
I think it is. I think, you know, the number of people using psychedelics in the last decade has gone up quite considerably, and people are much more aware of them. People are talking about them more. And I think that can only have a shift on consciousness, you know, and just a general awareness. They're becoming more accepted and acceptable, I think. But kind of collectively, I think that opens up possibilities, you know, across the population, really, generally speaking. I think maybe it'll help us embrace and engage the fast pace and the sense of change, you know, the drama of the change that we're experiencing technologically, environmentally. I think psychedelics can perhaps help us to be more open to the drama of 21st century existence on a global village, right? You know, it's a very fast-paced, wild and confusing world out there. Psychedelics also bring their own confusion, but I think they open up a kind of a possibility and an openness to experience to allow people to be more porous and flexible, perhaps, with what's going on in the world, and also connecting people more spiritually as well. So I think, particularly in you know, developed in the West, there's been very much a movement away from organized religion, usually primarily towards atheism and secularism. And I think people have become disenfranchised with, you know, that worldview, that possibility, that spiritual redundancy, you know, and people need a sense of meaning. People seek a sense of meaning and purpose, and psychedelic experiences can and are very much fulfilling that, I think, for many people.
Mm-hmm. So moving on from psychedelics, I'm sure we will come back to psychedelics later. You also have studied psi phenomenals and you mentioned dreams. Tell us a bit more about that. A lot of people tend to dismiss their dreams, or they don't see it as a way of they don't see it as another altered state of consciousness. They don't see it as something that you can learn from and work with.
Yeah. I mean, in the West, you know, in our kind of Euro-American centric world, anthropologists have called our current dominant culture a monophasic culture. That is, it only really values one state of consciousness, and that's the awake, alert, functioning, working, unaltered state of consciousness. Many other communities and cultures around the world are what we call polyphasic, is that they value and engage in many states of consciousness, altered states, meditative states, dreams, drumming, shamanic dancing, psychedelic states, etc. And so we, as a culture, haven't really engaged with and valued our dreams. They just tend to be written off as, you know, some kind of regular nocturnal hallucination that we have, and we don't tend to engage with them or remember them or talk about them or utilize them in our daily life. Whereas many indigenous cultures around the world, for instance, the first thing they'll do as a family and as a community will get up in the morning and share their dreams. And those shared or collective dreaming can be really important in daily decision making, and a child of 3 has dreams which are just as valuable as an adult if they are auspicious or portend something important or speak to some collective experience. So it's a cultural thing. It really is a cultural thing. And yet we're all capable of dreaming, but we've somehow been led to believe that dreams are somewhat meaningless or just a distraction or perhaps the random firing of the brain. And in many other cultures, they're embraced as being able to provide both personal insight and insight collectively, and also perhaps to be able to transcend time and space and give us information about near future events, that they may be precognitive or they may have a permanent function in terms of having they are like premonitions in a way. And in my work and in many others, we've researched this under very controlled conditions. I've conducted lots of controlled experiments with people, large groups of people, whether or not they can have accurate dreams of the future. And in my own personal experiences, I kept a dream diary for a very long time and just began to observe when my dreams related to near future events. And I came across this kind of rough average that about 10% of my dreams related to near future events in some way. They were thematically or very literally related to them in a way which didn't seem to be coincidental. If it was just one dream a year, say, then you could say, well, it's a coincidence. But when you actually study them and observe them and take time to engage with them, you begin to see that the arrow of time starts to point in interesting directions, and it seems that we are elements of future lives can be evident in our dreams. So
wow, the problem for a lot of people is that, including myself, we forget our dreams. Even when we're in the middle of it and it feels very profound, then the moment I wake up, it's gone. How do we make sure that we remember the dreams, enough of it to write it down?
We just train ourselves. It's like a muscle. It's like anything else we do. We have to set the intention, first of all, that we want to remember our dreams. It's good to do that just before you go to sleep. You can repeat it to yourself, an affirmation that you're going to remember your dreams. And the first thing that you do in the morning is you're going to write them down. So you need to have a pen and paper next to your bed, or a dictaphone or an audio recorder. And you just train yourself to get into the habit that the first thing you do when you wake up is you write down your dream or you record your dream. Because in a very busy world like myself, I have a child, I have jobs, and usually what happens in the morning is the alarm goes off. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, where am I? Who am I? What do I? And then suddenly you remember all the things you have to do that day, all your responsibilities come flooding in, and poof, the dreams just evaporated very quickly. So it's a matter of training yourself to give the dream world the priority. And there are some other tricks you can use as well, like waking up a little while before you have to get up, waking up, setting your alarm, remembering that you're waking up to remember your dreams, going back to sleep for another hour or so, and then you're able to have a kind of richer and more engaged dream, which hopefully you can recall a bit easier. So it takes a bit of training.
I've noticed that most of the dreams that I remember are the latter part of the night. But I sometimes thought that, is that daydreaming? Should I really take them seriously? So you say that's a dream that has to be taken seriously.
Well, we can take them all seriously, and even daydreams are, it's part of our imaginal or imagination, if you like, the imaginal realm. But there's a particular period just as we're waking up and just as we're going to sleep. It's called hypnagogia. It's technically not the same as a sleeping, dreaming state of consciousness. It's somewhere in between. It's neither sleeping nor waking, and it's called hypnagogia.
And it's different from lucid dreaming.
You can be lucid when you're in hypnagogia, but hypnagogia are usually very rich in mental imagery, often very bizarre, very vivid, and these can be very rich seams for mining elements of our own unconscious. And in that process, we begin to discover some things about ourselves, perhaps.
And sometimes they're very cryptic. How do we decipher those dreams?
Well, I think they're nearly always cryptic, but they're often very meaningful and personal if we were able to drill down into them. It's a matter of trying to understand our own dream language, and it's a bit different for everybody. So, one of the very first books written in Sumerian cuneiform was a dream interpretation book. I think it may be the world's first ever book. But these dream interpretation books, it's not a universal. There are some maybe dream themes which lots of people may have, but generally most of our dream content has a very personal flavor to it. So it's a matter of beginning to decipher our own signs and symbols. And the dreaming mind works by association. It's not linear, it's not linguistic like our waking mind, which is very logical and directional and based on language. The language of dreams is often poetic, full of puns, full of double and triple meanings, and associative. There's often themes and archetypes and mythical tones to them. They speak to more closely to kind of fairy tales and myths than they do to our waking life. And I think that's probably the good lens by which to view them, because we live by myths. We have our overarching myth stories about ourselves, about, I'm a psychologist and I'm an explorer of consciousness, or, whatever myth we carry around with us, which gives our life meaning and purpose. And that's the language of our dreams and our unconscious, and our deeper drives and motivations and fears as well.
Is it just our unconscious that we get access to through dreaming, or does it give us access to other realms? The reason I ask this question is because I recently lost my nephew. He was 14. And what has happened is that a lot of people, he comes to a lot of people's dreams. And similar to the morning rituals in the old tribes, when we wake up, we contact his parents, everyone's telling them about the dreams. And sometimes it sounds like people are receiving messages to relay to other members of the family or his parents. Is that his way of communicating with us? Are we accessing the realm in which he lives in at the moment?
That's a really beautiful example, and I'm sorry to hear about your nephew. I guess that really depends what we believe about the nature of reality. And, the mainstream scientific view, if we can say there is one, tends not to believe in the possibility of communicating with spirits of the dead, for instance. However, that kind of worldview doesn't have all the answers as yet. So I think it can be meaningful to embrace the possibility that you're having a collective communication with your deceased nephew. And that is something that isn't uncommon to many, many cultures around the world. And Jung spoke of the unconscious mind, and yet we have this collective unconscious as well, where it goes to a deeper level. It transcends our own individual identity and being, and connects with our family, our friends, our species as humans, with other species, with the realm of spirits and the dead, and so on and so forth. Who are we to say? I don't think we know enough in science currently to dismiss that out of hand. And if you're having collective experiences, there's something important to that and meaningful, which if nothing else, helps with the grieving process, but also can find a richness and a greater sense of meaning and spirituality through those kinds of experiences. So absolutely, it should be fully embraced.
And what's the difference between lucid dreams and normal dreams?
Well, lucid dreams are a kind of normal dream in a way, except for we are aware of the fact that we're dreaming. And you can train yourself to dream lucidly. In the softer definition, it's just about becoming aware of the fact you're dreaming. And when we do that, usually what happens is we wake up, you know. And if you train yourself to lucid dream, that's usually the first thing that occurs. But with time, you can develop the sense of awareness that you're dreaming, maintain that awareness without waking up, and then you're able to have volition and control within your dream. The fact that you realize you're dreaming, you're able to go make choices in a more informed and aware kind of way. And so, okay, I'd like to fly or walk through the wall or see a particular person. And so you can have some greater agency over your dreams. They stop being passive things that happen to us and an active engagement in an imaginary, impossible realm where you can do anything. And there's no limits to what you can actually do in a dream or in a lucid dream for that matter.
And how can we train ourselves to lucid dream?
So the training involves, you know, first of all, paying attention to our dreams, remembering our dreams, recording our dreams, working with our dreams on a daily basis. Once we begin to remember them with a good degree of reliability, we can train ourselves to develop an awareness. Now, the thing is, usually we never ask the question, like even when we're awake or when we're asleep, am I awake, you know, or am I dreaming? We never ask that question. And so we never ask that question when we're awake. So why should we ask that question when we're asleep? So we have to begin to do a kind of reality testing, a matter of raising our awareness about our state of consciousness when we're awake, through mindfulness, through meditation, through paying attention, and through reality testing. So we could say right now, am I awake? Are you awake, Brenna? Are we? Well,
Are we?
we can try and do some things to check, you know, the simple things like turning on and off light switches or checking the time, trying to read something. Are you able to read that? If you're able to read that, then chances are you're awake, because there's some
But I
things...
heard that in lucid dreaming, you can do all of those as well because you have control.
Well, it's still always very difficult to read.
Okay.
Text will just start to dance around and morph and change into things. The written word does not present itself very easily in dreams. And so there are certain signs we can use. So for instance, if you encounter your nephew, you go, well, okay, so I know he's passed, and yet he's here, so perhaps I'm dreaming. And then there you go, okay, I'm in a dream. And then you can say, well, great, let's have a conversation, and you can ask some questions. So it's a matter of training ourselves to reality test, to be aware, and to set intentions. And those things will help us in our daily life as well.
And are there places where we can go and get trained for lucid dreaming?
There are, so many people offer lucid dream training. Friends of mine like Trikar and Charlie Morley. Charlie just ran a workshop this weekend at a Tibetan monastery in London called the Samezong, or training people for lucid dreaming. With that one had a particular focus on his recent research he's been involved in helping people deal with PTSD and trauma through lucid dreaming. And they found some really astonishing results in a controlled experiment where people reduced their symptoms of PTSD. But there are people out there for sure.
Moving on from dreams, the other topic that is very, very fascinating is telepathy. And I think one thing that a lot of people in this world are talking about are telepathy tapes, which I invite everyone who's listening to this podcast to listen to telepathy tapes. To me, it's one of the most important podcasts that as a species we've ever made. And I found it fascinating, but I assume it wasn't as groundbreaking for you, because you have been researching this for a very long time.
Yes, though not with that particular group.
Yes.
And the telepathy tapes, it's non-verbal autistic children mostly, or young adults. And it seems that they may have a particular gift for this kind of exceptional phenomena of telepathy. But yes, I've been researching this area for a couple of decades and aware of the work of Diana Hennessy Powell. It is astonishing. Perhaps not so astonishing to me as a parapsychologist. We're aware that pretty much anybody in the population can have telepathic experiences, and but people don't tend to have them very often that they're consciously aware of, but they may occur. Some kind of very common everyday types are like telephone telepathy. You maybe haven't spoken to a particular person, for a year or longer, and then you're suddenly just thinking about them, and out of the blue, they call you, and just after you've thought about them, and you suddenly go, oh, is that them calling? And sure enough, you find they're calling. There's been experimental work done to show that this happens far more than we'd expect by chance under controlled conditions. And it turns out that it's a very common phenomena. 90% of the population have had this kind of experience. So there may be kind of more subtle everyday types of telepathy that everybody has, whereas there may be, in the same like we have gifted musicians or anything like that, there are people within the population who have a particular proclivity for this kind of experience, and that may be non-verbal autistic children, for instance. And you could see why that might be the case, given that they have a particular neurocognitive style anyway, which might then make them more able to access those states, but also that they aren't using their usual communication channels, right? They have no means of verbalizing their experience directly, other than through keypads and things like that. So in the same way we have music aficionados, we may have telepathic aficionados as well. But I think it's something that is inherent to humans generally, and probably all species, in fact. We found it in animals as well. But there are some animals which seem to be particularly good at that, such as dogs and cats that know when their owners are coming home, and they seem to be there at the window waiting for them just as they return, but somehow knowing before they arrive. So it seems to be a latent ability of organisms, of humans and other beings, to have these psychic abilities there, but they're usually very subtle. And in our experimental research, we get very small effects, but we get them quite reliably. So it's something that is subtle. It tends to be largely unconscious, that we're not consciously aware of them most of the time. And somehow useful and beneficial to the organism as well. So we often find that these kind of experiences occur under times of need and crisis. So particularly in the First World War, for instance, the Second World War, when before modern telecommunications really, and when people lost their loved ones in battle, it'd often take months to find out, when they were kind of informed by the army or whatever. And very commonly, people would know, their family, their mothers, their lovers would just have a knowing. They'd often get a visitation. They'd see an apparition by their bed, and they'd have this knowing, a deep knowing that their loved one had died. That's one of the most common kinds of psychic experiences people have, but they perhaps maybe only have it once or twice in their life when somebody important to them becomes lost. So it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen to people, it fairly reliably changes their view about the possibility of psychic experiences. And that's why we find the majority of the population do believe in the possibility of psychic abilities, because they've had one or two experiences, but they don't happen all the time.
And if you have any doubts, telepathy tapes removes all the doubts.
Well, yes, I mean, they're very compelling. I have to say, as a scientist, they don't have a total scientific rigor to be proof, you know, if we can use that word. We never prove anything in science. We only ever support our theories and ideas, but they are very, very compelling, but there's still some possibilities for alternative explanations. So it'd be good to see more rigorously controlled experiments. Nevertheless, the phenomena do look to be very extraordinary. But they're not extraordinary because this is something that is common to everybody. It's just in the extreme in these cases, I think.
Mm-hmm. And how about the role of psychedelics and telepathy? In my experience after ayahuasca ceremonies, I feel that I have special powers for some weeks after the ayahuasca ceremony. I think about someone, they immediately phone. I need to be somewhere. I don't need the verbal communication. But I don't know whether there's any research done about the role of psychedelics and our telepathic abilities.
There has been some, mostly my own, it turns out. And this is something we do commonly find, that not just with psychedelic experiences, but if you have a near-death experience or some other kind of spontaneous spiritual or mystical experience, people feel much more open to psychic experiences. They have more synchronicities. They report having more experiences of telepathy or clairvoyance or even precognition, you know, thinking things before they happen or dreaming them before they happen. So it seems those kinds of profound mystical psychedelic experiences open us up generally to the possibility of these experiences. People have more experiences, they believe in them more following psychedelics. It's hard to test experimentally. I've done some experimental studies of this myself. There was a few done mostly in the 1960s. And it does seem, from my experiments at least, that there is a greater possibility of, in my case, it was precognition, getting information back from the future. Although it's not entirely reliable because it seemed to be mediated by people's prior beliefs. So I did some experiments with a group of top-level scientists who didn't tend to believe in psychic abilities, and they did very well on my experiment. They seemingly demonstrated their precognitive abilities to prove that precognition wasn't real, which was quite interesting because they scored the targets as, you know, the absolute lowest, you know, but too low, impossibly low. So, and then I took a group of psychonauts and they did extremely well, but they also did very well under the influence, in this case of DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But then they did really far too badly when they were not on DMT again. So it seemed to be that the psychedelics would enable one's belief to be levered in such a way that the impossible becomes possible. And I think that's probably one of the main functions of these profound experiences in altered states, is they break down our conceptions of reality a little bit and allow a bit of magic to come in for a while. And then we kind of get back to the ordinary mundane world.
Sadly.
You know, well, by necessity, you know, we still have to go to work and look after the kids, right? But they allow for the possibility of this deep sense of interconnectedness of everything, which I believe is actually inherent and real.
The other question is whether you're aware of any research that's done on the role of psychedelics and autism. The reason I'm interested in this is because I sat in a session with a woman who has a 12-year-old nonverbal autistic child. The child was at school. The mother started the session. And halfway through the session, the mother said that her daughter was with her in the room, which she wasn't. She was at school. And then she said, she's here, she's under the blanket with me. And the daughter told the mother not to worry about anything and that she's absolutely fine. And she just needs to relax.
Great.
Which to me, I didn't read too much into it when it happened during the session. After the session, the mother noticed that she had a couple of missed calls from her daughter's school. She goes to, obviously, special needs school. And naturally, she got worried. She phoned them back. And she said, no, there's nothing to worry about. We just phoned to tell you that your daughter had an exceptionally happy day. We've never seen her like this.
Amazing.
And then when they went home, she phoned me later and she said, my daughter is a different child. She now puts her nose on mine. She's interested in physical touch. And then I had a follow-up session with her a few weeks later, and she said that their relationship is completely changed because she trusts that her daughter is very capable, and she has figured out that her daughter is very, very capable.
Yeah.
And interestingly, around the same time, I came across telepathy tapes. And I sent it to the mother, and the mother couldn't stop crying. And she said, this is very accurate. All of that is true about my child, but I had always thought this is just me. This is not real. And now I'm very interested to see whether psychedelics could help us go to the realm where these children live. So instead of teaching these children how to spell and how to communicate with us, with the help of psychedelics, we can go to their realm and communicate with them telepathically rather than having to type or find words to communicate with them.
What a beautiful case. This speaks to a few different things. It's kind of a fusion of telepathy tapes with kind of psychedelic telepathy. And it's something, so I've done research with people who have autism who've taken psychedelics directly, not non-verbal, not extreme autism, and they often report that it's very beneficial in reducing repetitive behaviors, opening up greater social perception, emotional perception, and also in just kind of relating and understanding non-autistic people better. So of the 150 autistic people I surveyed, they generally had very positive experiences with psychedelics. Now, of course, in this case, the daughter didn't have any psychedelics, but she does seem to be very, very much in tune with her mother. And what this appears to be is a case of kind of transference, or counter-transference, or rather of the mother's experience seemingly being perceived by the child, or experienced or felt in some way, and it's had a positive change on the child directly. Before she even saw her mother after this mushroom experience, the daughter had experienced the change, and their connection has grown as a result. We do sometimes see those kinds of experiences. They used to be called kind of hitchhiking experiences. Is when people are in a room with people who are all tripping and nobody else they haven't taken any psychedelics. They often feel like they're having a psychedelic experience themselves. Now that could just be suggestion and just being part of the atmosphere. But there are some cases from therapy of people having psychedelics, and often between therapists and their client, in fact, or other people, where they're seemingly having a shared experience even though they're not present. Now, the limits of our scientific understanding are kind of quite stark here, but let's be open to the idea that the daughter of your client was somehow picking up on her mother's experience, and by proxy has had their own psychedelic experience. And so, yes, maybe there is a sense in which psychedelics can also help us to understand the inner world and connect more deeply with autistic children who are nonverbal. We see something very similar in the shamanic world. It's called perspectivism. It's a kind of knowing by becoming. That's how they come to obtain their knowledge of the world. And it's very alien to our Western world.
Yeah, what does that mean?
So perspective is a knowing by becoming. So if you want to understand something, you turn into that thing. So it's about shifting your state of consciousness. So if you want to understand the medicinal properties of a plant, you drink ayahuasca or eat peyote, and you become the mind of the plant. We had it with one of our participants in our creative problem-solving study with LSD, a biologist working on the relationship between fungi and a plant, the species had been working on for years, and he couldn't quite work it out. He came to our lab, we gave him LSD, and he turned into the fungus. And he said he was able to grow inside the rootstock of the plant and discover something possibly new about the nature of this relationship he hadn't discovered in the previous 3 years of doing conventional science, you know. So it's a matter of shifting perspective to that of another. And that could be your autistic child or a plant, or getting down with the molecules that you're studying for your genetic research. It's a whole different way of embracing knowledge, okay, rather than accepting or anticipating that we can't have direct connection and experience with anything outside of our own body. So this isn't anything alien whatsoever to shamanic indigenous peoples around the world. It's just alien to us Westerners, you know. So there's every possibility that your client had an experience that their child picked up on that had an effect on the child, had an effect on the mother, and their relationship has grown and become more connected as a result, you know, directly through both of them, not just from the mother.
Well, then the question I have is, given that you have studied various altered states of consciousness, is it possible for people to be able to communicate with these children in that realm without the help of psychedelics? Can they access that through meditation or other techniques?
I mean, potentially, yes. What we find about telepathy is it's not like a direct linguistic communication. It's not. It's a shared experience or a shared emotion or a shared notion. We're not able to communicate like works of literature or, you know, lots of high information content, but there is a sense that people can know things. You know, they can know when a loved one is in danger or has died or has had a life-threatening illness. You know, anybody and often has those experiences. So yeah, there's a sense in which you could tune in with that person and begin to know more about their inner world and how they experience the world currently. But I don't think we're going to able to communicate deep details of, you know, oh, I need to go to the shops and buy 3 apples and 2 pears and all the rest of it, you know. But there is a sense in which there is something that can be shared. And maybe, yes, maybe through altered states or practice, you know, meditation, psychedelics, dreaming, could be a way of a deeper connection with that other.
Because one question that I had when I was listening to telepathy tapes was about that teacher who wanted to go to the hill in order to communicate with nonverbal autistic children, and then the children decided to welcome her and they allowed her to go there. She didn't have to do anything. It was the students who basically allowed her to do that. So it's not something that we necessarily have to work hard. I'm looking for shortcuts, you know? No,
sure. Well, it's always nice to have shortcuts, isn't it?
It's something that they can teach us as well.
No doubt. I mean, if we're open to it, yeah, if we're open to it, I think it takes an openness just to, we have to allow the reality of it, right? And for these kids, that's their reality. It's their lived experience. They don't have to pretend or believe it. It just is their experience, right? For the rest of us, we have to get past all our barriers, you know. So if there's an invitation there, that's going to make it easier, I guess, you know. But I think our own beliefs and our perceptions restrict what we can experience. That they are the real limitations to the possibility of any experience, really. And that's why profound experiences like with psychedelics or trauma, crisis, spiritual emergencies, they're able to have these profound, long-lasting changes because they break down all of our prior beliefs about the nature of reality and show us something greater is possible, you know.
But do you think this is something that everyone can access?
I think, yes, I think it's something.
But why is it that some people can access it more easily than the rest of us?
Because some people have already been cracked open, I guess, you know. We find it, you know, that people have more spiritual, unusual, exceptional experiences if they've had childhood trauma, for instance. That's quite common. Or trauma of all kinds. That the people perhaps on the neurodivergent end of the spectrum have also more access to these experiences because they already live in a more unusual world. You know, autism often brings with it other things like, you know, savants and synesthesia. You know, their experience and perception of the world may already be very, very different from the rest of the population. And so they're possibly more open to these kinds of experiences too.
And what happens, for instance, some people go through phases of receiving these messages and being able to travel between realms, and then it stops. Because one assumes that once you're cracked open, you remain open.
Well, I'm not sure it is ever a permanent state. It can be. So I work with people who had spontaneous spiritual experiences. They would find that the experience could go on for moments, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, sometimes years, you know, but sometimes it could be momentary. There doesn't seem to be a limit on how long these experiences can last, but they don't tend to last indefinitely. They may be that it's useful for a while, but actually, you know, walking around in a permanent kind of mystical state or state of heightened psychic awareness may be quite challenging to operating in the daily world, you know, unless you're able to be a kind of healthy recluse and hide yourself away, then, you know, having that kind of psychic permeability may be a bit distressing or a bit distracting or a bit disturbing. Imagine if you are very tuned in to everyone's inner world and traumas and all the rest of it, and, you know, and you get on a tube train, that could be extremely overbearing, right? It's not the ideal time to be psychically permeable if you're in large crowds of unhappy people. So, you know, and I think a lot of people who are very sensitive do struggle and suffer with the burden of that porosity, you know. So it isn't always a gift. And I think that's probably why we don't see it so widely available in the population, because it can be a little bit dysfunctional, you know, to daily life.
So we talked about various states of consciousness and a bit about science. So we are at the psychedelic renaissance, or maybe we have passed it a bit. There was a lot of interest and a lot of research going on in Western institutions. What are the gaps in your opinion? Because the deeper I go in this topic, the more I realize that there's so much that cannot be explained via scientific methods of research. Do you think that science can ever catch up with the whole scope of what we're talking about here?
I actually do. I think science as a method is actually really brilliant. It's just a set of empirical tools for testing ideas and allowing us to have some sense of how genuine those ideas may be, our theories, our models, our hypotheses. The trouble is with most of the scientific endeavor is it's contained within this belief that around material reductionism, so that consciousness is kind of produced by the brain is the kind of working assumption, or at least it's very strongly related to the brain, and anything that seems to imply a trans-cerebral consciousness, i.e. consciousness beyond the brain, is therefore just total baloney, woo-woo, you know, flim-flam, whatever, you know, whatever kind of the way it becomes ridiculed, you know, and scientists begin to worry about their reputation. These experiences are often quite spontaneous, so they're hard to put under the scientific microscope. But I don't think they shouldn't be studied. And in fact, I think they absolutely should be studied, but in an open-minded way without too many presumptions. Now, when scientists now in this psychedelic research renaissance are beginning to look at certain of these phenomena in a genuine way, there's more interest now in near-death experiences, for instance, and the mystical experience. The mystical experience itself has been almost completely redeemed by the psychedelic renaissance. You know, the mystical experience was either demonized or pathologized pretty much culturally. And now we're seeing that actually the mystical experience, if you have one during a psychedelic therapy session, chances are you will reduce all your clinical symptoms. So we find we measure the mystical experience. How mystical was your experience? It's crazy to think, how mystical was your experience on a scale of 1 to 10? But we measure it like that, and we find that, yes, the more mystical the experience, the greater are people's reductions in depression, anxiety, addictive behaviors and tendencies, end-of-life existential fear, and so on. So it's one of the best reliable predictors of clinical outcomes from psychedelic-assisted therapy is how mystical was your experience. So the mystical experience has now flipped 180 from being pathological to being part of a better sanity, in fact, of better mental health. So that's no small thing.
That's an important shift. Yeah.
Unfortunately, all the other kinds of experiences have been kind of ignored, you know. So, but what about telepathic experiences? What about having an out-of-body experience, or feeling like you've got communication with a deceased loved one, you know? Where is that in the story? And so I think we should open up our science to explore these things. I've begun to do research on this, and sure enough, they tend to be related to much better well-being when people have those non-mystical exceptional experiences. We found that they very reliably improved all kinds of indices of well-being. The number one was that people felt they had a much greater sense of purpose and meaning in life, which turns out, when you ask people who are depressed what the most important things they wish they could change about their depression, the number one thing is their sense of purpose and meaning in life, right? They lose their sense of purpose and meaning through their depression, or vice versa. And these exceptional experiences that people may have with psychedelics really do give people a sense of purpose and meaning. So I think they are valuable experiences. We shouldn't just cast them out because they don't fit with our supposed scientific model. And remember, the science is just a method. It's a method of observation and testing. And I think it should be open to exploring and understanding these experiences better, so we can more reliably have them in safe and beneficial ways.
Can you picture a time when Western science and indigenous knowledge will work together as equal partners? Because at the moment, I feel that there's a little bit of arrogance towards shamans and all the indigenous wisdom, which to me is so valuable.
Absolutely. I hope, and I think we're beginning to see the inklings of that. Unfortunately, you know, the psychedelic renaissance has been mostly co-opted by the biomedical model and pharmaceutical startup companies, and that's where all the investment and money is and regulations is coming from, you know. But there are some courageous researchers out there, like my good colleague Simon Ruffle. He's been doing psychiatric trials of the benefits of ayahuasca, but working directly with Shipibo, Kinibo, ayahuasqueros, healers in the design of the studies, how the ceremonies and the treatment is run, and also within the interpretation of the results. However, Simon and his group Anaya are quite unique in this respect, but they're at least showing a way in which we can begin to, hold traditional Western scientific values and indigenous wisdom together in a way which, they not necessarily compatible, but at least they're on equal footing, and that we don't give special status to one. And, there is a sense of a hegemony of the Western medical model, but it's failed to treat many, many conditions, particularly within psychiatry. So I don't know why it's got this pumped up kind of big opinion of itself. We should be more humble. We should be open-minded as scientists. We should be rigorous and very particular in our work. We should do good science, but we should be open-minded, and we should embrace the knowledge and the wisdom of people who've been using these things for thousands of years. What do we know, really, compared to them? So yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully,
Hopefully the day will come. You mentioned that when you studied psychology, you felt that it was not convincing. This is a struggle that I had. I left journalism. I started studying counseling, and I just sitting in the classroom, and I thought, I'm not convinced by any of these, the various schools of thoughts and this and that. And I thought, no, there's much more to us than what a white man from 200 years ago, probably wealthy, middle class, straight, came up with a theory of my mind and your mind, and I'm sure they were very well connected, so they could get their theories published. Are now telling us this is the way I operate and you operate. But then when going forward, I feel that there's still a lot missing in terms of even our psychedelic therapy training.
Yeah.
And that feeling got even stronger when I went to Ecuador, spent a couple of weeks with a Shuar shaman, and I felt that there's this massive gap in the way we see humans in the West versus the indigenous way of seeing humans. But then I'm still unsure, how can I bring what I received from there into a practice in the West that works for the Western human who has a very different lifestyle and different needs from the Amazonians? Yes,
this is a conundrum, but I think it's really vital that you're exploring that, because I think there is a tension and a friction there. The Western therapeutic model, is different to the shamanic model. I think there are some overlaps in some ways. But I guess we have to meet people where they're at, really. So we don't necessarily have to push the Western therapeutic model on them, or a shamanic worldview either, that we may not necessarily fully understand, but we realize is different. But allow the person themselves to explore and express what's coming through, and be open to the possibility that while your experience might feel more at home and within a shamanic context rather than a psychotherapeutic context. And I think, the transpersonal psychological lens is quite useful here, though it's mostly developed by white Western middle-class men with beards, of course, like most areas of the academy. How boring, including myself. Here I go. But it's at least open to the idea that, we have the intrapersonal, we have the interpersonal, and then we have the transpersonal. And maybe that often some of the work is more intrapersonal, particularly when you're dealing with trauma and a lot of kind of personal family history stuff, whereas some of the experiences may be more transpersonal. And then there may be a mixture of the two. So whatever frames we're using, they should be broad enough, I think, to allow for the more extraordinary to have room, for those kind of more shamanic elements to emerge and have a seat at the table, and not just seeing everything through the lens of trauma and intrapersonal kind of childhood issues, right? Because yes, that's really important, particularly in our Western psyche, but it's not everything, right? And I think we're in danger of, everything looking like a nail if you're a hammer, right? And I think transpersonal psychotherapies at least are broader and more open to those shamanic worldviews or Eastern mysticism or whatever it may be, yeah.
Which is very new. I haven't found that many transpersonal courses in the UK, and a lot of people don't even know what it is.
No, sure, it's managed to remain completely obscure, even though it's been around for about 70 or 80 years, yeah. And I think the psychedelic renaissance is shining a light on transpersonal psychology more than it ever has, because the roots of psychedelic therapy was rooted in the transpersonal, and the transpersonal psychology was partially born out of the psychedelic era of the 50s and 60s as well. And that it's open to all of this broader range of experiences, but it's still quite obscure. There are some centres in the UK, like Revision, for instance. They're particularly transpersonal counselling and psychotherapy focused. But I think it lends itself well, especially to psychedelic integration, where people are more likely to be having these transpersonal experiences. If you're dealing with everyday psychotherapy and psychology, maybe not so important. But I think it is important that helping people deal with psychedelic integration and therapy should at least have an awareness of this full spectrum of experiences that people may have, which you don't ordinarily have on a day-to-day basis, right? Otherwise, we're closing down the conversation instead of opening it up.
Are you currently practicing as a transpersonal psychologist?
No, I began training. I've done 1 year of a diploma in transpersonal counselling, but I'm more of a research academic psychologist, so yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping to leave a link so book sessions with
you. Not. I mean, I may qualify ultimately, but I'm too busy doing research most of the time.
Dr. Luke, is there anything else that we would?
I did
For today, obviously, I'd love to have you back.
Yes. My delight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
I really
thank
appreciate
you for
your knowledge and the fact that you shared it with us.
Well, I'm delighted at your openness and curiosity, and that you're willing to go there. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.